And that response should send a clear message that the forces of moderation are much more compassionate than the forces of radicalism and terror. The Philippines, the government has worked with international donors to deliver aid to Muslim communities in the southern Philippines that the terrorists have exploited. They're building roads and bridges and schools and health clinics and providing microcredit to local entrepreneurs. The whole purpose of this part of the strategy is to isolate the terrorists and extremists and to encourage the local population to join the fight against them. Third, the nations in the Asia Pacific are increasing regional cooperation in the fight against terrorism. Malaysia and the United States have established a regional counterterrorism training center in Kuala Lumpur. There are law enforcement training centers in Jakarta and Bangkok that are improving the capabilities of security forces from across this region. And last year, ASEAN nations concluded a mutual legal assistance treaty that will improve the sharing of evidence in terrorist investigations. In March, foreign ministers from across the region held a counterterrorism conference in Jakarta, where they discussed ways they can improve cooperation in the battle against terror. Finally, nations in the Asia Pacific are working to defeat the terrorist hateful ideology. Prime Minister Lee of Singapore says this, and I quote, "The fight against terrorism is a long-term ideological struggle." I completely agree. We must bring the terrorists to justice. In the short term, the best way to protect our nations is to keep the pressure on them, is to share intelligence, is to talk a lot about where we may think they are, and to keep our security forces pressuring them. But in the long term, the best way to bring peace is to defeat them in the battle of ideas. Our enemies are followers of a violent and narrow ideology. They have a vision which is narrow because it despises freedom. It rejects tolerance. It crushes all dissent. And they have goals. They want to impose this ideology as far and wide as possible. I believe that in the interest of peace, we must promote an alternative vision based upon human dignity and human liberty. A hopeful vision. A vision that is far stronger than the dark appeal of resentment and murder. And that's precisely what we're doing. And that's exactly what leaders here in the Asia Pacific region are doing. In Indonesia, President Yudhoyono hosted an interfaith dialogue soon after taking office, where he called on his fellow citizens to ensure that, quote, "the forces of light and reason and hope overpower the forces of darkness, despair, and violence." The head of the largest Muslim organization, Dr. Hassim Mozadi, was one of the first Muslim leaders to visit Ground Zero in New York. And here's what he said: "There is no violence, cruelty, chaos, or viciousness on behalf of religion, including Islam." In Malaysia, Prime Minister Badawi is working to promote what he calls Islam Hardari, or civilization Islam. He's called on his fellow Malaysians to, quote, "show by example that a Muslim country can be modern and democratic and tolerant and economically competitive." In the Philippines, President Arroyo has reached out to Muslim leaders and has called the Filipinos to oppose, quote, "terrorists who kill, bomb, and maim to enforce an ideology of evil." A group of leading Filipino Islamic jurists issued a joint sermon declaring, quote, "Islam and terrorism stand on the opposite ends of the moral spectrum. Murder and the killing of innocent civilians in warfare are strictly forbidden." These and other efforts are making a difference. And there's fertile ground to do so, because you see the vast majority of citizens in this region and around the world reject extremism. They want to live in peace. They want to live in freedom. And it's in the interest of the United States to actively support these forces of moderation, and we will do so. Freedom has transformed this region. If you really think about the past, it's amazing what has transpired here. Freedom is transformative. Freedom is a powerful force. There's more work to be done here. We must work for the day when the people of North Korea enjoy the same freedoms as the citizens of their democratic neighbors. We must press the regime in Burma to stop arresting and harassing and assaulting pro-democracy activists for organizing or participating in peaceful demonstrations. Burmese regime must release these activists immediately. It must stop its intimidation of these citizens who are promoting democracy and human rights. It must release all political prisoners, including Aung San Suu Kyi. We'll continue to work with nations like Russia to advance our shared interests while encouraging Russia's leaders to respect the checks and balances that are essential to democracy. We'll continue to work with China. But as we do so, we'll never shy away from expressing our deepest held values, that each person has human dignity, and that we believe strongly in liberty. You know, China will be the host of the Olympic Games. I'm looking forward to going. And it's going to be a great moment of pride for the Chinese people. It'll also be a moment where China's leaders can use this opportunity to show confidence by demonstrating a commitment to greater openness and tolerance. And as finally, we look forward to free and fair elections in Thailand. APEC nations are supporting the advance of freedom in this region. Indonesia, Malaysia, and Singapore helped lead the effort to include democratic and human rights principles in the ASEAN Charter. Japan has incorporated democracy and governance programs in its official development assistance. South Korea hosted an historic gathering of the world's free nations, the Community of Democracy Summit. These are important steps, and now we must build on them by forging new regional institutions to encourage the continued expansion of freedom in this vital part of the world. And so this week, the United States is proposing the creation of a new Asia-Pacific Democracy Partnership. Through this partnership, free nations will work together to support democratic values, strengthen democratic institutions, and assist those who are working to build and sustain free societies across the Asia-Pacific region. The lesson of freedom's advance in the Asia-Pacific region is this: the desire for liberty is universal, written by our Creator into the hearts of every man, woman, and child. Whenever they're given a chance, whenever they're given an opportunity, the people of every culture and every religion choose freedom over oppression. In Asia, millions have been given this chance, and they built free societies that are sources of peace and prosperity. And now we must give that same chance to millions across the broader Middle East who share the same desire for freedom that burns in the hearts of the people of this region. I want to thank the APEC nations who are standing with young democracies in the Middle East that are under assault by the terrorists and extremists. In Afghanistan, forces from Australia and Canada and South Korea, New Zealand and Singapore are helping the Afghan people build a free nation and stopping the Taliban and the Al-Qaeda from returning to intimidate the innocent. In Lebanon, forces from Indonesia, Malaysia, and South Korea and China are serving as part of the United Nations force that's helping bring stability to a free nation that is threatened by radical regimes and terrorist violence. And in Iraq, personnel from Australia and Japan and South Korea are helping Iraq's democratically elected government rebuild from the rubble of tyranny. We're working hard to stop Al-Qaeda from turning that country into a safe haven. You may have heard on my way down here, I stopped in Iraq. Stopped in Anbar province. Anbar was an Al-Qaeda stronghold. The leaders of Al-Qaeda had announced that they were going to establish a safe haven from which to launch further attacks on my nation, for starters.